let's get started now. So with that, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this edition of the GMF webinar series. We host this series where every month we feature a different topic focused on GMF programs. And this month and during the following 2 months, we'll be tackling subjects about different ways to reach net zero GHG emissions. And today we focus on circular procurement. So my name is Sharon Levitsky, a project coordinator with the Green Municipal Fund's Capacity Development Team. And I'm here with my colleague, Jessie Granger, project officer also with the Capacity Development Team. And we are both here for this webinar. I'm here hosting the webinar, and Jessie is here as technical support for today's webinar. And before we go any further, I would like to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement on behalf of SCM. I'd like to begin this session by acknowledging that I am joining you from lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. We at FCM recognize the Algonquin Anishinaabe people as the traditional custodians of the land upon which FCM's offices are located. I personally am located in Montreal, recognizing it as the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka peoples and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and all First Nations, both in shaping and strengthening this community and country as a whole. Wherever you are, please join me in paying our respects to the original stewards of this land and committing ourselves to thoughts and actions that will lead to meaningful reconciliation wherever we live now. Next slide, please. So before we dive in, there are a few housekeeping items to get through. Today's event will be taking place in English with French interpretation available. To join the French interpretation, you can click the interpretation button in the lower right of your screen. It looks like a little globe. Aujourd'hui, nous avons des présentations en français et en anglais. Si vous souhaitez écouter en français, veuillez cliquer sur le bouton d'interprétation en bas à droite de votre écran. C'est un petit globe, et sélectionnez l'option française. As we move through our presentations today, I ask that you submit your questions to the Q&A box as they come up. We will address them during the overall Q&A at the end. And you're welcome to ask questions through the chat box during the presentations in the language of your choice. We'll keep an eye out for any clarification questions and make sure that they get addressed when possible. Next slide, please. So here is our agenda for today. So we'll have 2 presentations from our amazing presenters, Kristen Strandberg and Joanne St. Godard, followed by a question and answer period. And following the question and answer period, we will hear from our waste lead, Catherine Loriot, to learn more about how GMF can support circular economy. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about FCM's Green Municipal Fund. We represent 2,000 member municipalities in every part of Canada's 10 provinces and 3 territories. FCM's Green Municipal Fund, or GMF, exists to develop and execute sustainability projects, establish and share best practices and lessons learned, and improve the environmental performance of municipal installations. GMF supports innovative projects that tackle environmental challenges and have significant social benefits, as well as strong business cases. It shares lessons learned from these projects with Canadian cities and communities of all sizes. And with that, we are going to get started with today's presentations. So our first presenter today is Kristen Strandberg, who is a cities strategist at Circular Economy based in Amsterdam. Kristen holds a bachelor in urban and regional planning and a master of science in environmental management and physical planning, giving her a multidisciplinary knowledge base to urban development issues. She has previous experience working in the public sector in Sweden as an environmental urban planner, where she conducted environmental impact assessments of urban plans to guide the development in a sustainable direction for people, planet, and the environment. At Circle Economy, she is responsible for the research and analysis behind scans, roadmaps, and guidance documents, as well as facilitating workshops. And with that, I will pass the floor to Kristen.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Christine. You can maybe go for the next slide. Start my presentation, please. Perfect. So yeah, my name is Christine Strandberg, and I will start this webinar on circular procurement by setting the scene a little bit about the circular economy, specifically in cities and regions, and then just briefly go into how you can move into action and develop circular procurement models in your cities or regions. Next slide, please. But first of all, I would just like to briefly introduce us at Circular Economy and why I'm here today. Next slide, please. Perfect. Circular Economy is a global non-governmental organization, and we're based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. We work with businesses, cities, and nations to accelerate the circular economy. And our vision is an economic system that ensures the planet and all people can thrive. And for this, we aim to double our global circularity by 2032. Next slide, please. And across our offerings, we help nations, cities, and businesses to uncover where they are through data and research, such as through material flow analysis. And then we gather important stakeholders to envision a shared path forward and break down the important steps needed to get to this envision through concrete actions and policies. Next slide, please. And during our decade of existence, we have supported more than 80 businesses, 50 cities, and 20 nations. And in order to share the inspiring cases that we have come across in our work, we have developed a knowledge hub, which is an open source online collection gathering more than 3,000 circular case studies across the world. So please have a look to get some inspiration from other circular champions across the globe. And next slide, please. And during the last couple of years, we have gained more and more presence in Canada, actually. We have worked both on national, regional, and city levels. We have worked with developing baseline assessments for Toronto and Montreal. We have developed a circularity gap report in Quebec. And we have recently facilitated 10 workshops with local and regional governments through the CCRI initiative, through FCM. Where we supported them in accelerating the circular economy in local and regional governments. Next slide, please. So if we start from the beginning, what is really the circular economy and what does it mean for cities? Next slide, please. So let's try to understand what circular economy is, and also in comparison to our current economic system. We currently define the economic system that currently prevails as linear. A linear economy traditionally follows the take, make, waste path. And this means that raw materials are extracted, transformed into products, used, and finally discarded as waste. So in this economic system, value is created by producing and selling as many products as possible. Next slide, please. But in a circular economy, materials and products are used to their fullest potential and are continuously reused, refurbished, and recycled in a system that is potentially even waste-free. And in this way, the circular economy aims to achieve inclusive economic, social, and environmental prosperity within the boundaries of our one and only planet by making the efficient use of our resources. And here we can see that it's important that circular economy is so much more than just waste management. It's about making conscious decisions throughout products and services life cycles, even in the beginning, to design products in the correct way from start. Next slide, please. Oh, this slide was lacking. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I saw that some of our things have disappeared, but I can speak about it anyway. So why is this important? The COP26 revealed that most nations see energy efficiency and the transition from fossil fuels to renewables as key to delivering net zero emissions. But these areas, they only account for 55% of greenhouse gas emissions. The other 45% is embodied in everyday products such as our cars, clothes, buildings, and food. So transitioning from a take, make, waste linear economy to a circular economy where waste is designed out and where products and materials are reused, cascaded, and remanufactured is the only way to tackle the remaining 45% greenhouse gas emissions reduction needed to limit our global warming. So this is what will get us to steer well below the needed 1.5 temperature rise. So combining these two agendas between circular economy and climate mitigation and energy transition agenda is crucial. So how circular are we currently in the world? At Circular Economy, we evaluate this on a yearly basis. This year, the Circularity Gap Report showed that the global level is only 7.2% circular, which is even a decline from 8.6% the year before. So this means that only 7% of our materials are reused, and yes, almost 93% is discarded as waste. Next slide, please. And in Canada, you have kickstarted the transition to a circular economy, with many cities and regions beginning to work towards the circular economy goals. But a new report by the Council of Canadian Academies found that the country is actually lagging behind the 7.2 global level of circularity. So in Canada, you only cycle 6.1% of the materials that you consume. So what can we actually do to improve this number, and where do we need action to take place? Next slide, please. If we scale down from the global, national to the local levels, we know that cities are at the epicenter of our global system. And cities, they cover only 3% of land area, but more than 50% of all people live in cities. And this is even estimated to increase to 70% by 2050. And cities also generate approximately 80% of our global GDP, but also uses 2/3 of the global energy use and 70% of our global resources. Next slide, please. And when we look at Canada, we see that it's very similar. So 81% of the Canadian population live in metropolitan areas. 63% of national employment is concentrated in your metropolitan areas. And 61% of the Canadian GDP is generated in cities. So the question is, how can we make our urban areas more circular? And what would that entail? Next slide, please. So just like in a circular city, in a circular economy, in a circular city, the value of resources and assets is maintained for as long as possible. For instance, in a circular city, assets and products are shared or leased. Energy production is renewable and local. Buildings are modular and designed to be deconstructed or reused rather than demolished. Industries, they share their byproducts through industrial symbiosis. And mobility systems are clean and shared. And as you can see here, the circular economy can be embedded within each of these key urban systems, from water to housing and infrastructure to food and nutrition. And these can at the same time help find synergies and efficiencies across all these systems combined. So for instance, we can use wastewater sludge as fertilizer, we can capture waste heat from the nearby neighbor, or we can use nature-based solutions to clean our water while creating an enjoyable urban environment. Next slide, please. So how can we use public procurement to create a more circular city? Next slide, please. And if we start from the beginning, circular public procurement is the process by which the public sector purchases products and services according to the 3 principles of the circular economy. It's about regenerating natural systems, and this can be done by setting purchase standards to the production of sustainable food, for example. It's about designing out waste and pollutions through, for example, banning hazardous contaminants in the products and also banning harmful industrial practices. And finally, it can be to keep products and materials in use at their highest potential by, for example, using products as a service and leasing programs instead of owning products and materials, and thereby using more people can use the same products. So why is this really important? Public procurement is actually estimated to account for 15 to 20% of both global and the Canadian GDP. And this adds up to approximately 400 to 550 billion Canadian dollars that is used through public procurement annually. So by using public procurement in a circular way, it's a very powerful tool to push and shape the local economy to become more circular by setting circularity criteria in the purchase of goods and materials needed for sectors like buildings, furniture, food, and packaging. Next slide, please. And why is this important? The benefits to a circular procurement systems are many, but some of the most important ones are summarized here. So for example, by considering the full life cycle of products, we can maximize the economic value for the product. And instead of throwing out demolition materials, for example, they can be used in the construction of roads, saving the need to purchase new materials. We can also optimize resource efficiency by adopting repair, refurbishment, and remanufacturing and non-ownership models. And we can see a clear connection to the support of climate change targets, where the purchase of circular materials and goods can reduce emissions and increase resilience and create a more livable urban environment. Circular procurement can also protect biodiversity by banning hazardous materials or supporting sustainable farming practices. And finally, by adopting for new circular materials, technologies, products, and services, the local innovation environment can be boosted, which also contributes to local job creation and the support of the local economy. But we also know that this is not an easy task to transform the public procurement to become more circular. So how can local and regional authorities move into action and actually develop a circular procurement model? Next slide, please. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has developed a framework specifically for cities to organize the process of adopting a circular procurement model. The framework sets out 4 necessary steps to develop an inclusive procurement model in cities. So the first step is to plan the process forward by setting the internal ambition for the procurement process by organizing working groups and inviting those that are affected by these new procurement updates. Clear communication is key here to share the goal of the process with all those that will be involved in the process moving forward. And by building this internal capacity, but also conducting market research and identifying low-risk pilots, you can identify ways of embedding circular economy aspects in the upcoming tenders. But in order to try out the new process, it is recommended to start with a single product or a few materials before scaling it up. So next step is, once you have laid down the foundations, public procurement officers in collaboration with circular economy experts and other colleagues, they can work on setting circular criteria and requirements. And the development of circular criteria is an ongoing process, and the market dialogues that were conducted ahead of the tender will help to define what criteria and requirements that suppliers can respond to. And when we follow the initial steps, the team can then start to pilot this procurement. And once the first round of circular procurement has been tested and validated, other products and goods can follow suit. And finally, as your city government starts to procure more circular goods and services, Project managers and public procurement officers will gain the expertise in circular public procurement activities. And by sharing the lessons learned and the best practices, the process can be replicated across the city department and material categories. So the lessons learned from the pilots and the engagements with the relevant stakeholders can then inform a citywide circular public procurement strategy and a review of the regulatory framework at large. And finally, it can also inform the future training for staff across the municipality and the new business funding streams that will be needed for innovators. So please go ahead and read a bit more about the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on their website. It's a great framework to use. But now we will see how this can be done in practice. I will just give you a couple more slides about some case studies that we've come across Europe. So if we move to the next slide, please. So how can we actually plan this in reality? So at Circular Economy, we supported the Norwegian city of Kongsvinger, which is a city of less than 20,000 inhabitants. And we supported them to set up the process needed to create this circular construction procurement model and to further understand how their resources can be used in a more efficient and circular way. And we based our work on the previously presented framework. So as part of the support, we identified who needs to be involved of both internal and external stakeholders and what the expected outcomes are of each step. And to better understand what possibilities that Kongsvinger actually had, we identified which local material flows and resources that can be used more efficiently. So that's the last purple and green circle that you see in the picture. And by doing this, we can actually save money, both for the companies that will build in the city, but also the local authorities. And it also release pressure on the local waste facilities. But in more concrete terms, what products and criteria could circular procurement actually include? So we will look into two more examples here from two European cities that we've had the opportunity to work with the last couple of years. So next slide, please. So in Malmö, a mid-sized city of 300,000 inhabitants in the southern part of Sweden, the local authorities made an agreement with 4 office furniture suppliers. So that's furniture across the local authority, but also the municipally owned companies could purchase pre-owned, rented, upcycled, or repaired furniture. And they could even purchase repurposed and custom designed furniture used by old furniture, of course. And this agreement also enabled the city to sell their existing furniture that can be upcycled and purchased by other organizations and companies in the city of Malmö. And the next slide, please. And finally, we have a great example from the Finnish city of Turku, which is a city of less than 200,000 inhabitants. And they have developed a circular procurement model around food. And this model sets targets for food waste reduction and a percentage of vegetarian meals that will be served across the municipal services, such as schools and elderly care. And in order to track the progress of these criteria, they developed an emission monitoring tool that was used to track emissions connected to the food service contracts. And that was actually the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
Okay, thank you so much, Kristen, for sharing those great processes that hopefully municipalities will be able to start putting into practice or continue doing, since there are many that are already doing so. And with that, we'll move on to our second presentation featuring Joanne St. Godard from the Circular Innovation Council. So, starting Joanne. So Joanne St. Godard has served as Executive Director of Canada's premier environmental non-governmental organization, Circular Innovation Council, since 2001. Her expertise focuses on development of policies, programs, and practices that accelerate Canada's transition toward a circular economy, which prioritizes and delivers environmental and social benefits along with economic prosperity. In doing so, she leads innovative initiatives that put circular economy concepts into action, facilitating unique private and public partnerships, engaging and educating businesses, governments, and civil society, directing research to identify best practices, and conducting pilots to test theories and scale up solutions. Ms. St. Godard's extensive experience in developing effective economic and environmental policies that drive circular markets spans decades. She is a sought-after subject matter expert for consultation, comment, and insight on policy development by governments, interest groups, and media around the world. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I will pass the floor to you.
Thanks, Sharon. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to the team at FCM for hosting this session specific to circular economy and circular procurement. And most excited that there is a nexus, a deliberate nexus and call out here for its connection to delivering on climate emission reductions, because often folks think that circular economy is another way to describe recycling. But in fact, it is a critical tool to address our climate objectives as well. So, and thanks so much, Kristen. I'm going to be you're following up on some of the key points. In fact, there's a little bit of overlap. So I'm glad that we're able to. It tells me that I've hit some of the strong buttons. Obviously, often looking at Europe for some of those critical examples and the great work that you and your organization do there. So I'll be mindful of time and go through the slides with some speed, realizing that we've got simultaneous interpretation. So I'll be mindful of that as well. So next slide, please. So my organization used to be called the Recycling Council of Ontario. You may have heard that organization and its brand. We've been around in that capacity for the better part of 4 decades. And made the transition to rebrand to the Circular Innovation Council in June of 2020, to coincide with Canada's first hosting, actually, of the World Circular Economy Summit. And in fact, the transition to the Circular Innovation Council was really for 2 things. One, we were already doing work in other parts outside of Ontario. And so really our name was limiting us and not describing the national work that we were moving into, but also better described the frontiering work, the innovative work, the work that we were looking upstream, tools like procurement to actually transition markets to deliver more circular goods and services. And so the Circular Innovation Council seemed like the right title for us at the right time. But we are unique in the sense that we have a multi-stakeholder membership, which spans governments, industry, academia, and citizens. So we really have a broad spectrum of stakeholders from which we actually gather intelligence and support to do our work. So part of a key function of the organization is really to facilitate dialogue between that diversity of membership to make sure that we can come up with the most effective programs and policies to transition Canada from a linear, which has been described to you, to a circular economy. So our work, if you don't know us, falls in 3 major buckets or pillars of action. Certainly policy and advocacy is what we are known for. And we do work at all levels of government to help government introduce effective policies that advance that will help accelerate our transition to a circular economy. And it's not just environmental advocacy, it looks at economic development opportunities. It certainly ties into other aspects of our public policy interests. With that knowledge, or to inform our policy development, we do a lot of research and pilot programs so that we can trial things in the marketplace, bring all of the data and the information and the experiences from creating those pilots and doing that research so that we can better inform our policy work. And then from that, we develop resources and services to help advance government and businesses do their part in terms of accelerating that transition. And you can see across the bottom of the slide here some of the programs that we own and operate. and have created, and you'll see at the very end there, the circularprocurement.ca, and procurement being one of the very big pillars that we are working on, working with governments and the private sector to leverage that important buying power that Kristen described to you. And I'm going to quantify using some of the similar numbers as well. Next slide, please. So our circular procurement work actually is, as I mentioned, a very large part of what we're focused on, and in fact is how we are focusing and making the connection or the nexus to how the circular economy can actually reduce carbon emissions, as well as protect resources and minimize waste. So we held 2 circular procurement summits, the first of which were held in Canada, to bring together in particular the public sector to talk about the role of government, not in just regulating markets, but in fact incenting them through using their purchasing power. We have international partnerships with One Planet Network, where we work with the UN Environment, and then with the Dutch government, as well as 8 other member states in Europe, in the EU, and as well now we're happy to say that Canada is signing on at a national level the Circular and Fair ICT Pact, which is convening governments internationally to look at developing circular procurement criteria that will move manufacturers to design their products, particularly the first 2 being laptops and cell phones, to integrate circular design into those 2 products and to support circular business models in that sector to begin with. So some international work there. And we did an introduction on circular procurement at COP27. So that was part of the Canadian delegation agenda, and we were there to represent that as well. So, and right here domestically, we are doing a lot of work at the moment, creating those resources to help actually take these concepts and put them into action, which is of course our tagline. And we do that through educational workshops, as well as working one-on-one with the municipal sector and beyond. So a lot of work bringing those best practices right into the Canadian context. Next slide, please. So I don't think I have to hover over this slide too much. I think everyone here is impressed upon the circular economy is not just another way to describe recycling, but in fact, it is looking at an economic system. So more broadly, how are we producing and consuming goods? And the consumption piece is actually really where procurement comes in. So whether we're individual consumers or a business consuming with a supply chain, or governments procuring and choosing supply chain partners, we are all consumers in our own right in those instances. And so we have a tremendous influence on the market to advance our transition from a linear to a circular economy. And in fact, it's about this idea of a system in terms of minimizing our dependency on non-renewable resources, obviously by doing so, protecting biodiversity, minimizing energy and greenhouse gas emissions, and really doing more with less and optimizing our use of the products and the services that we are actually procuring. Next slide. So, and I think this is a dynamic slide. If you don't mind just maybe advancing, I think you're going to see that in Canada, as Kristen has shared with you, there is quite a lot of activity, particularly at the municipal level of governments who are choosing to create circular economy plans for themselves, roadmaps, and in fact, building in procurement as one of those pivotal action areas where governments right now today can actually start moving towards circularity. So it's starting to take hold. We're seeing it in policy, we're seeing it in practice, and really municipalities have this critical, I would say understated, but almost what I did describe as superpower as it relates to procurement in particular. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we have this interesting dichotomy or this nexus where we have a climate crisis. That is a word that we're continuing to use it. And what's interesting from a municipal perspective is that the inclement weather and the severe weather patterns that are, of course, caused by climate change in fact, become the municipality who has to deal with damage to public infrastructure, of course, safety of their citizens. So that the effects of climate change really come quickly down to a local level. And so that's why we're starting to see that municipalities are taking charge, if you will, and integrating climate action plans and circular economy roadmaps, because they are in fact on the front lines of the climate change crisis. Next slide. And in fact, 647 Canadian municipalities have in fact declared a climate emergency, and that number continues to climb. We are one of the worst emitters of carbon emissions in the world, with 700 megatons, making us the 4th world emitter per capita in the world. So we enjoy a fairly healthy lifestyle, and in fact are huge consumers comparatively to other nations because of our affluent position, and therefore in fact we are one of the worst emitters. So we have a lot of work to do in this regard, and municipalities have recognized that with their declarations of climate emergencies. But what's interesting about that is that even though there is a declaration of emergency, municipalities are not always clear in terms of what their role will be in terms of proacting a market change or a market shift towards preferring circular businesses models as well as products themselves. And of course, that's where procurement comes in. And we all know that municipalities, as I've mentioned before, are responsible for cleaning up on climate emergencies. So they have a fiduciary and a financial incentive or reality that really puts them at the fore of the issue. Next slide. So this has been described by Kirsten already. We know that in order for us to hit our targets in a Canadian context, we can't just rely on end of pipe, reducing the carbon emissions related to transport or building envelopes. We really have to tackle the 45% that is embodied or embedded in the products that we use and purchase every day. And without tackling that 45%, we will not hit our Canadian targets. So there's no way around this, this reality. And that's really, again, where the municipal purse, if you will, the procurement power that they have really comes into play. Next slide. So a number you've already seen earlier again. What's really exciting about the $400 billion that's spent on goods and services by the public sector on procurement, and that's all levels of government together. It represents that 15% of Canada's GDP. So you can imagine if we were to align and create criteria that preferred circular economy business models and products, we could quite quickly, with this very influential buying power, be able to shift markets quite quickly. So there are certainly direct ways that we can use public procurement in particular to advance those markets, direct spending on goods and services, but there's also indirect influence as well that maybe we don't think about. Stimulating the economy, a lot of stimulus packages that we saw coming out of COVID, and a lot of funding programs, a lot of challenges that we're seeing at the federal level right now. And then of course, municipalities are funders within their own communities, and you can tie requirements around circular procurement attached to those funding requirements as well. So there are indirect ways of influencing and to advance circular procurement. And then of course, training and employment capacity building, which of course, is a really important call out in the FCM funding, but certainly continual training so that public procurers and their departments and municipal departments across the board understand it, and they certainly understand how to implement it into their buying in their own ministries and their own departments. And we also know that that the public sector, because of their need to be transparent, their call out to as a priority, advancing the public good, that they are certainly important pace setters and market shapers. And what really excites me about public procurement is it's completely scalable. So you don't have to be a big city. You can, and examples have been shown and will continue to show that, in fact, small and medium-sized communities can use their own buying power to advance just as large one can, and in fact can be focused on local economic development, which is really an important objective of most municipalities. Next slide. So this is just right sizing that 400 billion to what municipalities tally up to, and that's 80% of the total public purse. So again, emphasizing this incredible role that municipalities have. And in fact, because they are smaller governments, can leverage that generally more quickly than provincial governments or other levels of government, federal governments. Municipalities tend to be much more nimble. You may not think of yourselves that way, but certainly to coalesce and to combine your powers and to work together, that is really a role that we see municipalities doing quite well, and certainly with the support of FCM as we go along. But coalescing that buying power, not to put your dollars together, but to actually create standardized criteria that then you can all use, is part of what we're building in the work that we're doing around advancing circular procurement in municipalities across the country. So we know they are the hub of the Canadian economy, but they're also incubators of innovation and catalysts for change as well. So in some cases, municipalities, because of their nimbleness, can take on a little bit more risk, or can provide great opportunities to trial new solutions, and are really important incubators of that innovation and advance our economic development opportunities as a nation as well. So it's not just about the direct spend. And then, of course, you have enormous roles, really pivotal roles in terms of communications to residents, businesses, and community-based organizations as well. Next slide, please. So just in the interest of time, I may go a little quicker. We'll go to the next slide. I think everybody is grounded in what is circular procurement, but in terms of what it is, and what are the principles that we need to keep in mind as we start to implement it in our own organizations. It's critical that we're collaborating across the whole of our organization. So this doesn't live with one department of a municipality. It is something that has to be built in from the ground up, and is certainly cross-functional across all departments. It can't live with environment or parks and rec or sustainability functions. It actually has to be something that the whole of government rallies around and works on. And in fact, it's really important to extend that collaboration to, in fact, vendors and suppliers that you intend to buy from, because you have to be able to bring them along with you so they understand where it is that you're going, and in fact, what you want them to invest in terms of the types of products and services that you're moving towards as you action your circular economy plan. And in fact, you can't do it without the vendors really involved. And taking stock of where markets are now, what vendors and suppliers are capable of doing now, is something that municipalities should be actively doing. What's the new innovative solution out there that provides me low carbon outcomes? You can't do that without, or get the answers to that without going to your vendors and suppliers. And you can't develop outcomes-based criteria, which in fact are less about specifying what the product is and what its function is, and more about what do you want that, as it relates to circular procurement, what do you want that product to deliver, service deliver by way of meeting your environmental objectives? So that's what we mean by outcomes-based, really starting to say, I don't want to just buy this widget. I want to buy a widget that's able to actually help me reduce my carbon emissions and to deliver a low carbon solution to me. So really important to think about what are the outcomes we're trying to drive, whether they be environmental, social, or economic as well. And then really this idea of filling an immediate need, but signaling to the future by having your vendors along with you in this education opportunity to show them where you're headed so that they can make their capital investments and integrate their new designs into their products to be able to deliver what it is that you want into the future. So we know most public buyers don't feel that they should or can be collaborating with their vendors and suppliers, but in a circular procurement context and framework, we want you to be doing that early and often in a pre-competitive way. Next slide. So when we think about applying, where in the procurement cycle can we apply circular procurement considerations? It's actually at each point in the pre-tender, tender, and post-tender phase. And so on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that if you think about pre-tender, there are certain questions that you can ask yourself around the strategy of potentially buying less. Do I need this item? Can I take stock of what I've got internally? Can we avoid the purchase altogether? Can we, if not, can we reconsider our relationship to vendors and suppliers as well? Then we go into the tender phase, which is really, we've decided we have to buy it. And here's some critical questions around buying better. Where does it come from? Who made it? What is it made of? How will it be used? And then a post-tender stage, what will happen to it? Can it be repaired and can it be upgraded? So these are some really practical questions, a starting point, if you will, in terms of how do I implement circular procurement and how do I do that differently from the traditional or linear way that I used to produce goods and services previously. So that's a little cheat sheet. The PowerPoint presentation goes into more detail. I'm understanding from the notations that we're at time, so I won't go through the next couple of slides. But what I will do, and I'll ask Sharon, if you're advancing to go to maybe our contact, I'm happy to disperse this PowerPoint presentation to everybody. You can go right to the end and go through these. These are case studies, and you've already heard of Malmer, which is there. But if we go to the next slide here, that's how you can get in touch with us. Circularprocurement.ca website is a storefront, if you will, a knowledge hub where you can get practical resources and information in terms of helping you introduce. And we're more than happy to chat with any one of you if you wanted to start moving towards an internal workshop for your teams or an external workshop with you and your vendors as well. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Joanne, and thank you so much for leaving your contact. Again, that is circularprocurement.ca to get in touch with the Circular Innovation Council and learn more about their great work. And with that, so we're just going to quickly go through the question in the Q&A, and then I will ask Catherine to talk a little bit more about how GMF supports circular economy. So, a moment for the question. And so, the question is, as a municipality, we're often not very well funded. Many circular procurement and sustainability actions sound brilliant and effective. However, they're brushed aside because of high upfront costs. How would you recommend we navigate this situation, aside from scaling up production/implementation, which would eventually drive down costs?
Who are you asking about this? Is it for me?
Whoever has an answer.
Whoever has an answer. Well, this is a common question for us, and this is something that we see across the European landscape as well. But we do have a lot of initiatives from the European Union that supports the financing the circular transition. So, for example, I'm working on one big project where we try to connect and bridge the gap between projects in cities and regions and financiers, so private investors. And what is needed? What types of risks do we need to ensure that we have all the risk assessments needed, and that we have a due diligence plan so that they can actually get funded. So that you can follow that process as well. I think it will also be very valuable for the Canadian context as well. But this is indeed something that is an often occurring question, and I am sure that that Catherine has an answer from the Canadian side of financing from GMF could be one potential source.
Yeah, I don't know, Catherine, if you wanted to pivot from that direction, but what I would add to that is, I think part of what I might what we've come across is that in fact high cost or it's actually a perception issue that in fact this requires high upfront costing, and in fact that might be because we're not properly accounting for all of the costs of not procuring our goods and services in a circular way. And so maybe the end of life costs or the upfront energy costs and production costs and the cost to missed opportunity or to innovations is not factored in. And so, one of the things we say is we're trying to buy value with circular procurement. So what is it that you value, and how do you're not equating value with cost? So I think there's this perception out here that green goods, it's just the colloquial way to describe some of the circular business models that are starting to come forward, are more costly. And in fact, that's not true when you start factoring in these externalities that are not often accounted for.
Great, and we'll take one more question because I saw that one more question came up. Is there a plan or program framework available anywhere to help implement sustainable procurement across a municipality?
Yeah, we can take that one. We're just about to launch the Canadian one. So we have learned so much from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's frameworks and everything that the Dutch are doing. In particular, I have to give a shout out to the Dutch because they're always the leaders in this regard. And we've built a Canadian framework that's just going under translation as we speak. And with the support of FCM and the workshops that we've been doing, we're going to be releasing that soon. So we'll make sure that everybody on this call gets a copy of that. But please do make sure I get your name and number and an email address. And it is literally a step-by-step how-to help municipalities build more capacity. And we're more than happy to help you with implementation.
Great, and with that, I would like to pass the floor to Catherine to talk a little bit about what GMF does. So if the slides could go back up, please.
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, I'm going to introduce myself, not just to put a name on my face, but also because I would be really interested and happy to discuss with you if you have any ideas or projects you're wondering if GMF could support these initiatives. And yeah, so I'm the lead for the waste and the water sector in the sector development team, where we're in the Green Municipal Fund team or program. And our team is working on renewing the GMF offer next year. So we're trying to update and revise our program in order to have a more climate action oriented offer in the next year. So this year, 2023, we're still offering funding, support, capacity development, and resource. Many of our offer details are on our website. You can see an extract of that website on the screen. As the lead of the waste sector for a couple of years now, I've worked in waste management. So I am in a municipality. So I know a lot about waste management, and that it's really transitioning from waste management sector to circular economy. So we'll want at GMF to support any initiatives in municipalities that need support, would it be funding or resource or training or capacity, into helping deploying circular economy in their territory. So in conclusion, we're transitioning from the waste management perspective to the circular economy at large. So we want to support, GMF wants to support really any initiatives that are going to bring more circularity for materials or resource management, but we don't want to talk only about waste anymore. So if you have an actual project or initiative, you would want to see if it's eligible for our funding. We still offer funding for waste reduction projects or waste management of certain waste streams. So you can, you can investigate if we would like to, if we could support those projects. But if you want to change for the next slide, please. We also had a priority. We're looking for projects that would be really introducing the circular economy initiatives in Canada in the municipal sector this year and next year. So if you have any circular economy initiatives or sustainable procurement strategy you want to develop, or you would want to see if we already funded some similar initiatives, or you need some examples or case studies, we do have our, we're starting to have a good database and of projects we supported. So this year, circular economy is going to be the priority sector. And if you want to change for the next slide. We launched last week or 2 weeks ago, correct me, Jesse, if I'm wrong, but GMF launched a new web page in our GMF website where you can find a lot of new resources on circular economy. And one of them is a guide that FCM developed with the help of the CCRI initiative, which is the Canadian Circular Cities and Regions initiative that we supported, where FCM is a partner with the Circular Innovation Council, and Circle Economy. So we all know each other. We've been working together for the last year, and we came across many very interesting municipal projects, and we would want to share this with any municipalities or regions or a group of municipalities that would be interested in developing a circular economy project. So you can find that in our website. And if you have any other questions, we can always refer you to the best person to answer your questions. And if not, you can find all this in GMF's website.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for the information, and hopefully you'll have some people getting in touch with you about that. And thank you again to Kristen and Joanne for the excellent presentations. And thank you so much to everyone for coming today.